Welcome back, family, to another episode of Shepherding Souls. I am excited for a couple reasons. First of all, it's game week. You hear me? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it is game week.
Commanders. We excited about that. This is football time in the Shepherd household. Second, we done came up. Y'all see behind us. You watched the first episode. What you see? The blank wall. We ain't po no more.
Oh
we didn't came up.
No, the reason that is like that is because I needed to wait on.
No, you're right. My father-in-law, because I don't know how to do
Yeah.
nothing with my hands except throw a football.
He needed to come hang those up because we put 2, 3. Well, I put the first hole in our wall, but we put some huge holes in our walls trying to hang things up improperly. So
Yeah.
he came about a week or so ago, and I was able to finally hang my stuff
Shout out
up.
to Eric.
So, but now we know how to do it.
Facts.
So
Shout out to
we're
Eric.
making them know.
But another reason I'm excited and for this is because I really enjoy this topic that we're talking about today.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's been beneficial. Something that my wife taught me essentially. I didn't really have any idea about this kind of thing and always took offense to this kind of thing, probably in previous relationships. But today we are talking about boundaries within marriage, boundaries within relationships. But before we do that, you good? How are you?
I'm good.
You straight?
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have a rough day with our youngest today, but we love her.
We do love her. She just don't listen, y'all.
Yeah, she outside today. She decided she was gonna be outside.
Wow.
Straight baby's kid today. But boundaries. So let's just put some definitions to what we're talking about. So boundaries in our marriage, we say that they are safeguards we put in place to protect our marriage. Simple as that. Things that we've either seen or things that we feel as though best safeguard or fence our marriage, to make sure that we are pleasing the Lord and make sure that we don't fall into temptation or do anything that doesn't honor God's design for marriage. You want to start it off with anything in general?
I would start off by saying that when we were discussing this, I think it's good to preface the talk about boundaries within marriage, relationships leading up to marriage, but mainly in marriage, that the enemy hates marriage.
Yeah.
That we can clearly see that there's a battle against marriage anyway, with the divorce rate being so high, and that it's worth protecting, it's worth safeguarding, because marriage represents the gospel.
Yeah.
I would like to start there. Like, just why do we need boundaries in marriage? Or you said that this was something that I taught you.
Yeah, essentially. So yeah, no, I would say that. I mean, I guess we can go back to the first time we had this conversation was, for those who maybe missed our story, when Evan and I were engaged, I was still in college. So I was finishing my senior year of college, still very much operating in a college space, meaning very much intermingling with female and male. Like, it was just like
very
a college.
co-ed.
Yeah, very co-ed environment, right? And in my mind, I was able to separate what I thought, I guess I was able to separate girlfriend, like friend, and person that I liked. Like, in my mind, it was like a clear separation at times.
Sometimes there is.
There is.
Yeah.
There is. And I think, again, some people are not going to agree 100% with what we say. Some people may feel like we're on the extreme with this, of course. But I think the first conversation happened because I was like, hey, I'm about to go to a soccer game with this friend of mine who is a girl, right? We were talking about that. And that's kind of where I would say the first time we ever had a conversation about, like, boundaries and things like
people
that.
With the opposite sex.
People with the opposite sex.
And preface, we were engaged at the time.
Yeah, that's what I said. I said
okay,
engaged. I said engaged. We weren't dating.
We weren't dating. We were engaged. So there was an idea, being believers and having the idea of what we wanted our marriage to look like. I was like, we really haven't talked about boundaries. And at the time, am I allowed to even say this? Like, at the time, you even had like a female best friend. Like, you had a girl
you
with
can
like
say
a
that.
best friend. And there were some things that I would say red flags. Like, are we gonna, when we get married, are we keeping the female best friend? Does that dynamic change? I feel like those are fair questions to ask.
Sure.
Not that at the time I felt threatened by anything that she had done or said or that you had done, but it's when you go from having a female best friend who has known you for years to marrying someone who you're becoming one with.
Right.
You know, you just want clear, like, you want to know, like, what is this? So when he mentioned going to the soccer game, I was just like, just the two of you, like, y'all just gonna show up together, y'all riding together, like, what's that supposed to look like?
And naturally, I think that put up like a wall for me. Like, it made me defensive at first because I felt like the question she were asking was more so questioning me as a man and my character and things and stuff like that. And I felt like, whoa, like this ain't even like that, or this is nothing like that, or this is not this, or this is not that. But fellas, if you're listening to this, what I would say is, especially if you're getting into a space where you're engaged or you're married, you need to take your wife's input on how women think. You really need to value that, right? Now, granted, if your wife is
struggling with some jealousy,
yeah, that's a different story. But as far as just women intuition and what women know about women, it works. Just like when you have when I have daughters, and I was a teenage boy at one point. Just like you can look at a boy and say, okay, this is what his intentions might be, and I can tell based off this, this, and this. I think a female is able to do the same thing for you in certain situations. And I could say for like, and let me preface this, like there is a place for that, for friendships. I'm not saying not say that we don't have friends who are, but there is a place for it.
We just don't have friends separately of one another.
Right, yeah. Right. But I had a question for you because, like I said, you kind of had, you kind of had experiences with it, I guess, but you had enough experiences to say, okay, hey, this is a red flag. So I guess where did the realization come from that boundaries were important for you? Like, what point did you say, okay, like, where did that come from? Because you even had boundaries like before you were even dating anyone.
Yeah. I feel like I feel like it was modeled for me pretty well within my parents' marriage when I was younger. It was whether or not they took heed to those boundaries further into their marriage, but I knew as a kid, like there were just certain things my parents didn't do, and it was very obvious, what they were trying to protect, and then also just being in worldly relationships and being mistreated, being cheated on, having multiple people engaging in your relationship when it's supposed to be an exclusive thing, and then turns out it's not. And I don't know very many. I mean, it's assumed be faithful. It's assumed, don't do things with other men or other women that you should only be doing with me. It's assumed, but it's not always followed. So I think coming out of those relationships and coming to Christ, I knew the type of man I wanted. Not necessarily that there was one out there for me, but I knew I wanted a godly man, and there were some boundaries that I put in place that were very practical. Maybe some people would even said they were a bit, extreme, but they protected me.
Sure.
And I'll say practically some of the things where I didn't just text men on my phone. Like my brothers and sisters from church, like all of my girlfriends had my phone number. My guy friends had my number too, but I wasn't just like, if a guy came to, like, had my number and I could tell he was getting a little too friendly and was wanting to continue to text me throughout the day, I would be like, hey, I just don't text guys throughout the day. Like, and my mindset was, when I did meet the guy that I wanted to marry, I don't want to have to be moving people out of the way to make room for you.
Oh, I was moving.
And
I was shuffling. And
because I knew how that would make me feel. Like, if so you're having to cut off all these females just to make room for me. And it, to me at the time, and I think there may have been a little bit of self-righteousness there too, but to me, I'm thinking, like, why do you need to entertain so many people at once? Like, is that a red flag? But it really just kept me from falling into sin.
It's given therapy.
So yeah, it really did I had certain safe, because again, I had been around the block in certain things. Like I had already experienced what a sinful relationship can, the products of that, the byproducts of that. And I knew that I wanted something very different. And so I had to move differently.
Yeah.
And that came with some clear boundaries that I knew when we got engaged, that eventually we would have to have that conversation about what are some things that we are absolutely not going to be doing in our marriage.
And we had that conversation. I think we kind of set up our initial like list or something like that during premarital counseling.
We did.
Right. Like what are some of the things that? Well, I think the first one that was really active and like outright in our marriage was like we don't ride with.
Yeah, we don't do be out in the car.
Yeah, we don't ride in the car with people of the opposite sex, right? Mm-hmm. So for me,
we're not alone with them.
Yeah, we're not. So that for me, that was very like it mattered because I was in like campus ministry at the time, and in campus ministry, you just want to be the guy to help everybody, right? You want to serve everybody.
Can I say something about that too?
Yeah, go for it.
I think what about you being in campus ministry, about you being on campus and you being who God made you to be. Right. And when you made the comment earlier about trusting your wife and knowing how women are.
Yeah.
I think it's important to know that it's not about you, your wife, or you as a wife saying like, nah, she like you, or I don't trust her, she gives me bad vibes. And I think that you should trust discernment if the Lord's given you that. But it's more so of, I know like how easy it was for me to like you. I know how easy it is to talk to you. I know how you can make people feel comfortable, make them feel welcome, make them feel like they can talk to you. And I know what that does to women when they feel like someone gets me, someone's connecting to me, someone's listening to me. And when you're a good guy. And sometimes, and you just being who God has called you to be, sometimes can send the wrong message if you're not clear about, I can still support, I can still be a brother in Christ, but there's only so close that you truly can get to me because I am about to make a covenant with someone else.
Right. So. Yeah, I was married. We were married when I started doing this. And that was something that, again, like you want to wrestle against and be like, well, what if one of these girls just needs to hear the gospel? And I'm like, well, I got a wife that can share it with her. Right. You know what I'm saying? So
and I don't think there's anything wrong with sharing the gospel.
But but I'm not saying that. But that was where the extreme went in. Like, you know what I'm saying? Because it would take time to
for you to make excuses about like, why wouldn't this work?
Yeah. Not saying like, I'm not saying that I wouldn't share the gospel with a female, but I'm saying like developing a relationship, a discipleship relationship with, someone who worked in a football building along with the players, which was I was a chaplain at the time. Coming to me with like relationship problems or coming to me with these problems and asking these, and I'm giving advice and counsel every day. You begin to, just like I do with the young men that I was with. We developed relationships. We became tight. We became cool, like brothers. And that's the same thing that happens, right? So that was like one of the first things. And it's like, oh, well, can you give me a ride across campus? People say that, and it's like, oh, it's just you just taking them across campus. But if I start doing that every day continually, like that's what I mean. If it's a 5-minute ride across campus 5 days a week, that's 25 minutes a week, right? And that seems crazy to think about, but it is. And that's like I'm doing that week in and week out. And the reason why we set up boundaries is because one day your flesh is going to be weak. Yeah. One day your flesh is going to fail you. One day you're not going to be as strong. One day you may come to work frustrated with your spouse. One day you may come to work and y'all just got into a big argument and you just you're not feeling your best and you got this look on your face, and the girl that's been riding in the car with you all year can tell because y'all been spending time together, and she says, hey, what's going on? And that's all. Like that is the first, like that can be a first step. Again, this is not all inclusive. I'm not saying everybody's like that.
And it's not always that easy.
It's not always that easy, but I'm just saying we've seen it over time. Like over time, you develop those relationships with people and you begin to open up, and then things just start to get expressed. And that's how nobody ever, well, let me not say that. A lot of people who end up in adulterous relationships never really had planned on being there sometimes. Like it just developed. They don't, I don't really know how we got this far. And it starts with little things like that. Hey,
and I have had a boundary in one area.
Right. Stuff like that. And I think, and again, it came up when I was in the police academy. And there was a classmate of mine who lived within the same area, and they were like, hey, can we carpool every day? And that was going to be like a 45-minute ride back and forth in traffic, like sometimes an hour on the way back. So that's like, shoot, almost 2 hours a day, 5 days a week with somebody other than my wife. What we think, y'all just think we're not going to talk on the way there? Like, we're not going to have conversations on the way there? Like, there's not going to be things that...
And they don't necessarily have to be inappropriate conversation. No. I think it's just the spending time with someone else on a regular basis.
It's something that can open up a door, right? And that's... And I want to say this about boundaries, too. It's not... They are there not because you failed, or they're not there because... you're, the worst at this. They're there because the enemy, like Heaven said at the very beginning, hates marriage, right? And because of that, we have to put those boundaries up, and we have to do those things, because if we don't, we're giving the enemy a chance to just step in and do whatever he pleases and whatever he would like. Okay?
I think that that's true, because we're all prone to wander in some ways, like wander from just our flesh is weak. And I don't think that, like you said at the beginning, anybody's marriage or whatever, that anybody intends to be unfaithful, especially in, a Christian marriage. I think they get there with the intention that I'm going to be faithful to this person all of my life, but life is hard. And I was reading in Proverbs 3:7, it says, "Don't be impressed with your own wisdom. Instead, fear the Lord and turn away from evil." And I think that not being impressed with your own wisdom, not being so, like, I would never.
Right.
And I feel like, transparently, I feel like you had that kind of mindset.
Yeah,
like,
facts.
I would never do anything. And I'm just like, you would never, but we have a real enemy, and we need to have we need to be able to resist him in some way. And boundaries are a very clear way to fortify your marriage. You need things that say, we're going to come to an agreement that these are the things. Nobody else has to like it. Other people may think we're crazy, but as long as it's you and me, we are not going to be doing these things.
Right.
And
it's very important that you're doing this, like, mutually. Like, there's not one person putting demands on the other person and the other person just subjecting themselves to these demands, because that's kind of dictatorish.
Yeah.
So we don't want to do that. We want to say, okay, I can agree with that. Though, like, I'm not saying it has to be your idea. You have to agree 100%, but you can say, okay, I see why this needs to be something that we do.
Yeah.
And you need to ask the tough questions, and I say, okay, well, how does this work if this happens? And here's the thing, like, if I'm unsure about a situation, I did this a lot when we first got married. Like, I would be like, hey, you cool with this? Or is this, like, what I'm saying? Not. And the reason I say that is because I had somebody tell me, like, if anybody's going to be offended, it shouldn't be your wife. Like, I don't want to offend her. Like, I don't want to please everybody else and offend her in the process, or please everybody else and hurt her in the process.
And vice versa.
Right?
Yeah.
So it really takes a bunch of, when you're setting these boundaries, it takes a lot of self-awareness, and it takes a lot of humility. And and especially on the men's part, right? Because we immediately, a lot of times, we dismiss stuff like this off of, like, we immediately dismiss it as jealousy or like, that's a woman
or somehow
problem.
it's coming against, like, your strength to be able to do something, when it truly is, like, not within your own
look at it.
I
think we should look at it like we look at this such a grandiose scale, like, oh, I would never cheat, but like, oh, I would, but look at it in a small scale, like something that you really, really, really enjoy, that it's not good for you, right? But they be candy for me or whatever. Like, if you just lay it out in front of you without any kind of guidelines or boundaries, you're going to indulge in it, no matter what your intentions are. You could have had a New Year's resolution. I'm not eating candy no more. But then you go to some kind of birthday party in February and they got a candy bowl. Right? What is the boundary that stops you from eating candy? Is it, hey, babe, you're not supposed to eat candy, don't let me get no candy, or you don't tell nobody and you just go and get a piece of candy? Now that wasn't your intention when you was going to the party, the kids' party. They handed out goodie bags. They said, hey, chef, they got an extra goodie bag. You want one? Right? And it's like, shoot, yeah, I'll take some.
Ain't nobody gonna know.
Right. So I just,
and you don't
like
want to oversimplify
Yeah, no,
it.
right.
But it typically does. It happens gradually, and when we were preparing for this, I was reading about just like, I know there's probably not like specific in the Bible, like boundaries in marriage other than to stay married to your wife and don't commit adultery.
Right.
But how do we keep that from happening? And in Ephesians 5, we usually know verses 22 and 24 about wives submitting to your husbands as unto the Lord, and husbands as the head of the wife, husbands are the head of his wife, as Christ is the head of the church. He is the savior of the body and the church. As the church submits to Christ, so you wives submit to your husbands in every way. And for husbands, this means love your wives just as Christ loved the church. But what stands out to me is the verse before that, that says, and further, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And I think that in creating boundaries, it is a submitting to one another.
Yeah.
That I'm going to put myself under you to put you first for what's best for our marriage to stay intact. So you don't particularly feel comfortable when I do X, Y, and Z. We just won't do it. It's not something that we will do in our marriage. Or we both understand that, no, we're not struggling with this in our marriage, but who knows what can come in 10 years. And this is how we keep that from happening.
Yeah.
And it says not just out of love for one another, but out of reverence for Christ. Some versions may say out of fear of the Lord.
Right.
And I think that the reverence for Christ, fear of the Lord I think it's John Piper that says, like, the fear of the Lord is preservation for us. Like, when we fear the Lord, it preserves us from falling back into old sins.
Yeah.
And I think, in a way, having boundaries in your marriage out of reverence for the Lord and love for your spouse preserves your marriage as well.
Facts. Let your boundaries be your fireplace.
Yeah.
Right? Let it be the fireplace. What I mean by that is, when you light a fire in a fireplace, it warms your home. Because it's in a specific container, it's in a specific place that is designed for it to heat a house. But if I was to take that same fire and say, I'm just going to light a fire in the living room, I burn my house down. So is fire just an evil thing that we never touch? No, but we need to make sure it's in the right context. Because if I don't put it in the fireplace, or I'm not using it on the stove, I'm likely going to burn my house down. So look at it in that same way when it comes to boundaries within marriage. Is like, yes, I interact with females and we have friends that are females, but we're all together. We either the husbands and wives, like, we're all, it's a family thing, or if there is a single female because Heaven does have a lot of friends who are single females, but they never coming over here when she's not here.
Right.
They never just like, hey, Shep, can I come talk to you about something like that? And Heaven's on her way back, and I'm like, yeah, we spend 2 hours together and wait for Heaven to get back. Now I'm be like, come late when Heaven gets here, and then we all have conversations together. So yes, I do have friends that are females, but it's in the right context. I'm not just out here texting a female on my phone, like, haha, kikiing, and sending emojis back and forth to no female that is my friend, apart from us having a relationship with that person together.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So,
And it's a way of just continuing to affirm your wife or your husband, and without them having to question, like, we know this is just something that we're not doing. So if there is somebody, like, we've not had this other than when we were dating, but like having a person who comes into your life or into your circle or is around that seems like maybe they're not as trustworthy as you would like them to be, or there's somebody that your spouse works with that maybe is not too keen on the boundaries that you have. You don't have to worry about your spouse. You know, because you know that, hey, this is how we keep our marriage strong, and not allowing the enemy to come in. But did you have anything to share about? I feel like you mentioned when we were talking about this, like the proverb about the guy.
Proverb, and Deuteronomy, both. Two things.
Yeah, about him walking past the seductress woman's or the adulterous woman's house, and
so in two things. Like, there's two examples of boundaries that stuck out to me, and the book of Deuteronomy. I know that's a kicker for some people, but Deuteronomy 17:17, right? God is giving them he's giving them some guidelines, because he's telling them one day you're gonna want a king, which is crazy in itself. But he says one day you're gonna want a king, and when you get a king, these are the things that you probably want to look for. These are things you need to have him do when the time comes for y'all to want to be like everybody else. 17, just the first part of 17, he says the king must not take many wives for himself, because they would turn his heart away from the Lord. Right? We know that marriage was designed for one man and one woman, but in the Old Testament they kind of got carried away with that. All right. And God is saying, hey, one wife is great for you, one wife is fine, okay, but when you start to have many that come from all different kind of places and all different kind of people groups and all different kind of things that are outside of God's people, what's going to happen is you're going to start worshiping idols. You're going to start going around different paths and doing things that they do and all kind of stuff, and they're going to turn your heart away from me. And sure and behold, what happened to my man Solomon, right? 700 wives, By the end of it, he started idol worshiping.
Mm-hmm.
The wisest man that ever lived, because he did not have that boundary set up. Okay, I need fear in the Lord. I need one wife. I know. And you got, like I said, it takes self-awareness. He had to. He needed to look in the mirror and tell himself, "I like women, and my daddy like women, and we like women in my family. So I need to safeguard this. I need to have one wife. I need to make sure I'm faithful to her and her only, and our eyes are on the Lord, right?" But that didn't happen. Another one is in Proverbs 7:8, right? Proverbs 7 is a story that pretty much a father is telling a son about wisdom. And he talks about this naive simpleton of a man who ends up walking down the path of, walking down the path of a adulterous woman or a prostitute's house, right? And specifically in the scripture, it says that he was walking near the path near her home, right? This is Proverbs 7:8, and the boundary in that situation should be, again, I'm not gonna go near the woman who's tempting everybody's house. I'm gonna walk. If I gotta walk an extra 2 miles around the house, I'm gonna walk 2 miles around the house. But that comes from knowing yourself, right? He should have known at that moment, like, if I walk, but you have to think ahead. I have to think ahead. I have to know myself. I have to be aware. I have to be humble enough to say, yeah, like 9 times out of 10, that woman you may walk by that woman and not say anything. But the one day, like I said, that you're feeling weak, the one day that she throws her, as it says, she threw her arms around him and gave him, sweet talked him to death, literally. And that one day he didn't have the strength to say no, but he had no boundary in place to protect himself when his flesh got weak. And that is what we need to do. That is what you need to sit down with your spouse, sit down with your girlfriend, boyfriend, fiance, whoever. If you plan on getting married, which you should be, if you're dating, start mapping those things out and have the discussion, and do it prayerfully and do it in humility, and be able to look at each other and say, we're doing this for the betterment, for one, honoring God and making sure that we're preserving the union of marriage.
Because of what it represents.
Right.
I'm going to quote David Platt. We listened to a marriage sermon by him years ago, and he said something so simple, how I read in Ephesians 5 that women submit to your husbands as you submit unto the Lord, and husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. And he was saying that, in a sense, for us, boundaries, they not always, because there's going to be people who are like, hey, we don't have a Christ-centered marriage and we don't have strict boundaries, but we've been married for 40 years. We've been married for this amount of years. We would never cheat on each other. And to me, I'm like, we're not going to leave it up to, well, we haven't, it hasn't happened yet, you know? And I've seen enough to know that it does happen to too many people. But he was saying that, like, when a wife is not faithful to her husband, then it shows the world that God's not worth being faithful to. And when a husband doesn't love his wife and is unfaithful to his wife, it shows the world that it gives people a false prediction of how Christ loves the church. And he loves it flawlessly, but when he designed marriage to look like the gospel, but then believers operate outside of that design, shows the world something completely false about Christ. Right. And so, to me, most importantly, that's worth protecting over what I feel in the moment anyway, or what I could potentially feel 15 years from now, when maybe we're not feeling as in love as we were at first, or we're going through some really hard things. Or I'm just saying,
who ain't? No,
okay, but I'm just saying those are real things. Marriages go through those things, and what's keeping you from staying in your marriage and staying faithful to God through your marriage? And it's funny that you read Deuteronomy, because I read 1 Corinthians 10, and it talks about Israel's idolatry, and them, marrying other women and getting into drinking and partying and sexual immorality, and that those things were put in scriptures for us to learn from them, lessons to learn from them. Right. And when Paul says, don't think you're standing strong, be careful not to fall, that the temptations in your life are no different than what others experience. And so I think what he's saying is, the temptations that the Israelites were tempted by are no different than what you're being tempted by. But are you going to trust that God is faithful and he's not going to allow you to be tempted beyond what you can bear? He always provides a way out. And I think sometimes our boundaries are our way out.
Yeah, like think about it this way too, man. Like a lot of y'all would not drive y'all car without insurance. Y'all ain't out here driving y'all, well, if you are, I'll write you a ticket later. But if you ain't driving without insurance, golly.
Who is that? Oh, neighbors?
What episode? All right, back to the beat. Like I said, a lot of y'all, a lot of people would never drive their car without insurance. Mm-hmm. They would never, any major purchase that you make in your life, you have insurance for your house, your car, you got insurance for your teeth, you got medical insurance, right? And a lot of people would say you really rolling the dice if you don't have medical insurance, dental insurance. You don't have a package of insurance for your house, car, all the stuff, commercials and everything just for insurance. We need to look at our marriage the same way. Like, what is your insurance to me? Boundaries are that insurance policy that you could rely on, right? Like, if you don't have that, like, you don't have insurance and things like that, you kind of like, just like, hey, something happened, it happened, right? Whatever. We figure it out when we get there. But that's a little too late once your car is totaled to figure out how you're going to pay for it and do all the things. So, like, I say, okay, I have this in place, you know what I mean, to protect me. So I know, like, okay, and it's not black and white. Let me preface with that too. It's not black and white. There's a lot of gray in this, right? Especially for me in my job, I interact with women all the time, mm-hmm. whether it be, you know, like that I specifically work with or just in general. Mm-hmm. I do all the time.
And that you're serving.
Yeah, and it is true. And it's not always, like I said, it's not always, oh, well, I'm a robot and I don't interact and I don't smile and I'm just like this and I'm, mm-hmm. No. But in situations that I can't help, I am leaning on the Holy Spirit. I am leaning on my convictions. I'm leaning on my conscience. Mm-hmm. I also have a mouth that I can stir a conversation away from something. Mm-hmm. Or if somebody crosses a line, I can easily say, "Hey, no, I'm not comfortable with this. I'm not comfortable with this. I'm married. I'm this or that or whatever the case may be. Like whatever. You receive a compliment, thank you, keep it pushing. Mm-hmm. But like I'm not out here just, you know,
entertaining.
Yeah, people. Just entertaining people, and I'm not out here just being a stone statue like." I only talk to my wife. Like I'm not out here like that either. So,
and I think that if you're watching this, unless you're very type A and you're like, no, things have to be black and white, that obviously you have to leave room for a situation. You're not going to be able to get
control
with a pen and paper with you and your spouse and come up with every scenario. But there needs to be some I would suggest that there are some things that, hey, these are things we absolutely do not do. And I think communication between we had a situation recently where it was something new for us that came up with your job. And I was like, you know, we've never had to face this. It's not something that we can really shy away from, but we need to discuss it because it goes against a very clear boundary that we have. And that conversation, while it may have even been a little bit uncomfortable, was needed to have. And now that both of our consciences are clear. I feel secure in what you're doing at work, and you know that I trust you and I'm not questioning you. And I think it's also important to say that having boundaries without having a heart submitted to the Lord
they just become
they're just a set of rules that you can easily break without any type of feel like there's any consequence. I think it's very important to know that if your heart is set to, I want to please God in my marriage, and I know that I'm sinful and I'm cased in flesh and that I am not in any position we live in a culture where, you know, we see leaders in churches and stuff constantly falling and being caught in scandals, and it's sad. And the question is always like, what were the boundaries that were crossed? Who were the people in his life that didn't, or her life that didn't see these things happening? You know, and I think that deceit goes a long way, but to have the mindset that I'm wise enough, I'm committed enough to my spouse, I love them enough, I'm strong enough to never fall into sin towards my spouse or in my marriage, whether it's looking at pornography or actually physically stepping out or emotionally becoming involved with someone, but maybe not physically. You know, just we don't have to pretend like we know what that feels like when we're like, I don't think I kind of like this person a little more than I should.
That's a tweet though, because people don't understand that. Like that's one thing all of this had to come for what it means to be totally faithful to your spouse, and that includes your thoughts, your emotions, what you're seeing, what you're saying. It ain't just like, oh, I ain't texting her, so I'm fake. But if I'm at work, this is a conversation later. This is probably another episode on this. But I look at her every time she go by at work, but I don't ever text her. We don't have a conversation, so I'm still faithful. No, you're not. So that encompasses all those things. You have to tell yourself, one, before even boundaries become a thing, you need to tell yourself, I want to be completely faithful and transparent with my spouse. You know, when it comes to being faithful, but also just the struggles or whatever you may have. You know what I'm saying? We started with those hard conversations, I believe. And then we kind of worked. But if I don't have the mindset of being completely faithful, boundaries are going to either I'm going to fight against them because I still like a little bit of like sin on the side, or I'm going to feel like I'm like compressed and it's a struggle because
because it exposes if you are a male or female and you are, you know, engaging in, you reading fantasy books and you like reading about people doing each other, or you watching people doing each other, but you don't feel like you do, or you feel like, but because you're not actively engaging with another person, that now that you have a spouse or a soon-to-be spouse that is requiring faithfulness of you, and they're saying, hey, I desire to be faithful to you in all of these ways, and for you to reciprocate that, and you feel like, well, we have to have about like, you tell me I can't look or do this or do that, well, I'm not really doing anything. It just exposes that we do like a little bit of our sin on the side, and which I said goes back to, if boundaries mean nothing if you don't have a heart that's surrendered to the Lord and wants to fear him and reverence him, and then also have a marriage that shows who he truly is, and making room for one another's faults too. And you know, I don't think that you can really get boundaries wrong, but I think you can readjust things if you feel like if you'd made boundaries out of jealousy or distrust in your spouse, then you can revisit those things. But having them with the foundation of, we want to honor the Lord in this, and we don't want to give the enemy any room to use our marriage as an example as to why marriage is not worth honoring, and ultimately that God and his son are not worth honoring.
Yeah. I mean, and I think anybody can start with boundaries. I mean, I start teaching our kids those kind of things. Like if they're struggling with something, I say, hey, what is something we can put in place to stop you before you get to that point, right? To stop you before you get to this place where you want to do this thing or that thing. So anybody, if you're listening and you say, oh, I'm not married or anything, or don't even date, you can still set up boundaries, right? For you in this moment. Like my senior year, I set up a boundary for myself in college. Like, hey, party's probably not the best thing for me anymore, because why? They put me in that, y'all know what I'm talking about, that like Friday night, like knuck a few buck space. Like, you know what I mean? Like it puts you in that like mood, like,
it makes you feel like you ain't never known Jesus.
Facts. And I'm not the person who goes to the party and not affected by the party. That's not my life. So I like to dance. I like to get it in. I like to be in the middle. I like to be the life of the party. So I'm like, it's probably best if I don't go to parties this year, because they're not going to push me any closer to Jesus.
They don't result me in behavior that honors the Lord.
At all. Yeah. And then you start, if in my case, I was leading campus ministry, and then it's like, not put myself in a double standard, because I'm out here
leading campus ministry and partying
and in the circle sweating like everybody else, right?
God really just is so gracious.
Yeah, facts, because the fire was coming out on Wednesday night, but on Saturday night I was still struggling. But the Lord, again, is faithful in that. So, but again, nobody was around me telling me, hey, Shep, hey,
you need some boundaries,
right? So that came with, when he who finds a wife finds a good thing. And I think these kind of things are what they're talking about, right? Like my mindset didn't change around that until after we met. I didn't know, but she taught me something in that way, where I was able to say, hey, okay, I need to set up this boundary. So whatever you need to reassess, whatever things you may struggle with, you know what I mean? If it's pornography or whatever it may be, let's set up some boundaries, right? Don't take your phone in the bathroom. Like small things like that, so that when it does come time for you, if God wills it for you to be married and have a spouse, boundaries are nothing new to you. They're nothing new. They're things that you've always put in place to protect yourself from sinning against God. That's it. You know what I mean? That's simply what we want to do in this. We want to put ourselves in a position to honor God with our marriage, right? We never want to give anybody a reason to say, discredit the gospel is coming from our mouth and be like, yeah, right, I just seen y'all doing this and y'all doing that. I want to put up boundaries so that anytime me and my wife step out, anytime me and my wife are doing something or putting something out, and we can say, okay, you know, we are honoring God in this, and we can share the gospel with a clear conscience, knowing that, you know, we love each other and we've protected our marriage.
Yeah.
You know,
and we
try to
still
be
100%
faithful.
believe that if one of us does do something that, you know, I'm not particularly talking about infidelity in this moment, but if one of us crosses a boundary and hurts the other person, that, you know, it is our job to reconcile and to make sure that it never, and repentance, and that it never happens again. So this is not from a place that there's no grace, or
Oh, yeah.
because, I mean, really the attempt of having boundaries is our working this out and fighting to get to the day when Christ comes, and we don't need those boundaries anymore because we'll be made whole and we don't want to sin.
Yeah, and I would say it served us, like just how's boundaries served us. I think even
That's
the
a good
time,
question.
even the times when I've had to like even like for example to revisit the one in the academy where I had a female like, hey, can we carpool because you know we both live. I can drive one time, you can drive, and I told hey, and I explained it. Like I didn't just say no. I was like, hey, this is a boundary me and my wife have set up, and this is why we want to honor God in our marriage and things like that. And the devil would tell you like you're being a jerk. That was my biggest thing. I was like, I don't want to be a jerk, or like the devil's going to say, oh well, you know, if you say that, then they're going to look at you kind of different. But the every time I had to express that, it was like the female that I had expressed that to, like respected it. They never felt like it was disrespectful. They kind of was like, oh well.
And the ones who don't usually struggle with boundaries in other areas of their life
Well,
too.
yeah.
They don't like anybody to tell them that they can't do something.
But I haven't had that situation
Right.
arise
Yeah.
yet. You know what I mean? Most of the time, like every time I've had to like, hey, step out. Another situation happened a lot of time at work where somebody like she was a hugger. And I was like, yo, I'm not comfortable with you. Like, you know, giving them kind of aggressive hug. I'm side joint. You know what I'm saying? Or knuckle
The church
touch,
hug.
whatever.
They were hugging you? Like,
You remember that?
In what way?
You don't remember that at the school?
Okay.
The one I don't
was
want to put
hugging
about.
you?
Remember
Okay.
I was like,
She was like, put her boobs on you?
it was like a full frontal joint.
Oh,
You know what I'm
okay.
saying? I'm like, I don't want to feel all the apparatus, bro. So, like,
I think that, okay, some people, even there are men who are affectionate and huggers and they want to like every time they greet you, but I think that you know what you're comfortable with.
well, I knew.
with this.
First of all, like, let's keep it a stack. Like, I knew what kind of female I was dealing with here.
Okay.
Based off the players that.
Okay.
So
well,
I-
then that matters too.
Right. So
Yeah.
I didn't want. It wasn't just like, you know what I'm saying. I knew what I was dealing with, and I was like, yo, this is probably like, I don't want her to get comfortable just hugging on me and thinking like I'm cool with it. Like, hell, nah, I am married, and like, you know,
And
it's
my
a
wife
boundaries.
is about that life.
Yeah.
She'll show up.
But some people just don't know, and males, if you in like, you don't need to be rude, you don't need to be anything other than Christ-like. And when you are like, hey, this is about like, you could, however you know, pray about it, talk to your wife about it, like, hey, how would you receive this? Like, really have these conversations and dialogue, because sometimes she'd be like, I think you overreacting, or you thinking too much about it. And I'm like, okay, but I still not comfortable. You know what I'm saying? So I would, you know, think
I
about
think
how to
it's
say
better to
it.
communicate it than to not, or to assume that your spouse
Yeah.
doesn't care.
And it's served us well. Like I said, it's made me conscious. It's made me think of being aware of my surroundings, where I'm at, what I'm saying, who I'm saying it to. It has made me more aware of those situations. And like I said, the times where I needed to do it, it sparked more. It may have sparked a conversation now. Like, okay, well, like, dang, like, what's a God-centered marriage look like? And who's like, you know, it can lead to gospel-like conversations that you need to have, right? So never be afraid to step out on faith, like step out on what you believe, especially when it pertains to God. Like, don't shy back because the world ain't doing it. They telling you everything they feel and think. So like, hey, this is what I do, and this is who we are. Like I said, you ain't got to be rude in your way of doing it. You do it in a way that is pleasing to God. And if they get attitude, they get attitude. But like I said, if somebody gonna have an attitude, it's not gonna be my wife. You know what I mean? So hey, that's just how I feel about it. But anything else you want to add before we
I would say
slide?
that as far as answering the same question, how has boundaries served us in our marriage? I think it's funny because the boundaries that I had before we got married, when I was working outside of the home and working with other men, that looked different just as a single woman working with other married men.
Yeah.
I had just boundaries with respecting other people's husbands, and I worked in a gym for 10 years, so I worked with a lot of men, and I always like, again, I had great relationships with them, work relationships with them. But when I came to Christ, there was this, it was like, you know, the fog was removed and my understanding of marriage changed and everything. And I was like, and when I'm speaking to this man, engaging with this man, I'm also respecting his wife. And whether or not some of the men may not have the same regard for their marriage, that ain't got nothing to do with my actions.
Right.
And now that I'm home and I'm not going to really travel and go other places like without you at the moment, and I'm not like engaging with men on a regular basis, what it does for me now is it just gives me a sense of peace. Like I'm just not, especially with the line of work that you do and like the type of rumors that people say about men who do your job and how they're unfaithful and they dogs and all this stuff. Like I literally do not think about any of that. Like when you leave for work, whether it's during the day or at night, like I'm not concerned about any females that you may encounter or what you may be looking at on your phone when you're away. Like I don't think of those things because we've made a practice of one, confession to one another, and you know, honoring our boundaries. And we're only almost 6 years into this, so I'm sure there are people, we have a lot more to learn about this, and there's probably people, I know that there are people that can speak to this with much more wisdom, but I think there is wisdom in not thinking that you are so wise that you don't need boundaries in your marriage, but that we should fear the Lord and have some boundaries.
Yeah, riding your bike without no helmet is all good till you crack your head.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
You are full of analogies today.
Hey, I'm just, that's all I got to say. You all right? Put your helmet on. You feel me?
You crack your head.
Yeah, right. Straight like that. But we love y'all. We holla. See y'all on the next one.
Follow the shepherd.